Welcome, and thank you for joining me for this video, The Proper Order of the Alchemical Essentials and the Sword and the Stone. Two concepts stood out to me when I was studying fixation that I wanted to meditate upon a bit more. The first is that we discovered that the Lover's Key shows the right order of the three essentials in alchemy: sulfur, salt, and mercury. In addition, Paul Foster Case states that the Hierophant was an incorrect depiction of these two concepts. This is one where my perception of what we are really transmuting in alchemy is a bit more subtle than just our consciousness in general. The second is the symbolism of the Arthurian legend of the sword and the stone. Let's start off with my realization regarding the sword and the stone. The sword in alchemy is a Saturn principle because its primary function is to bring death, but it also represents Mars because the blade is often made of iron. The sword is our desire, which must be tamed and transmuted into discernment. The sword is also very obviously a phallic symbol, representing the divine masculine. That the sword is removed from the stone is interesting. We know that the stone starts off as lead, the metal of Saturn, when we first work with it, and that the hidden purpose of alchemy is not to simply transform it into gold. When we work through the latter planets, we will discover that the sun does not hold the central position. Instead, we start with Saturn, and we return to Saturn. Even in the astrology, as we pass through the 12 steps of alchemy and the zodiacal signs, we will discover that there is a secret 13th moon. There is a missing zodiacal sign and step in alchemy if we truly marry the solar tradition to the lunar tradition, bringing a balance to the science and magic. Once the phallic symbol, a symbol of the masculine sign of Saturn, and therefore Aquarius, is removed from the stone, something fascinating happens. The stone becomes a feminine symbol. In Disney's Sword in the Stone, they give this feminine symbolism away by including the anvil. The anvil is known as the mother anvil. The furnace was considered masculine, and the anvil was feminine when it comes to blacksmithing. The act of removing the sword from the stone, then, is the same process of going from the Hierophant state of consciousness to the Lover state of consciousness in the tarot cards. We are aware that our consciousness is divided into parts: the receptive subconscious and the masculine consciousness. Now that they are separated, we can start to do work on both of them. Yet the anvil can act as the intermediary of our will so that we can beat our swords into plowshares, as Isaiah 2:4 describes it, turning our desires to productivity instead of using them to compete with our fellow humans. Anvils are normally iron as well, again bringing up the idea that both the sword and anvil had been of the same nature prior to the sword being removed. The removal of the sword simply makes the anvil receptive iron, connecting it with Mars. However, originally anvils were made of stone and even bronze. Bronze is a combination of copper, the metal of Venus, and tin, the metal of Jupiter, making the anvil a combination of the two benefics of astrology. Here too with Venus we have the feminine indicated and a higher state of consciousness represented by the forge being free from the masculine sword. Now, once I thought alchemy was more of an overarching approach to consciousness, I realized that it actually goes into details with the different aspects of our consciousness. Instead, we are working with particular aspects of our consciousness. When we see the subconscious and the conscious depicted in the tarot keys, we know that we are dealing with the evolution of our personal consciousness. We could go on a long journey focusing on the cards depicting these two aspects, but we will save that for a future topic of consideration. A great deal of the evolution of our consciousness is covered in the 7 tarot card keys depicting the path of the seeker. I will leave a link to the series that I did on that in the video description box below. Today, I just wanted to look at why the Hierophant, the card for the sign of Aries, was the wrong configuration for consciousness. Now, the conscious mind and the subconscious show up in many different symbolic ways. You may be questioning that the Hierophant depicts the subconscious when it is normally depicted as a woman. Lilies are a symbol of the subconscious when it is not acting in a receptive fashion. That is the primary difference between the supplicant and the Hierophant card that represents the subconscious, and how the subconscious is depicted in almost every other card. The only other time that we see the subconscious openly depicted as lilies is in the Magician card. Notice how the other supplicant is wearing a rose pattern on their shirt. Red, in particular, is usually associated with divine masculine, but red roses are a symbol of the analytical conscious self, that aspect of ourselves that is the waking conscious mind. So first, one of the problems with the supplicants in the Hierophant card is that they are both acting masculine. The masculine act of working with the higher self is through prayer. They are praying to the Hierophant, asking for direct intervention into their lives. We can find a little bit more information out when we look up the definition for supplicant, one who asks earnestly. If we look at the roots of the word, it means pleads humbly and humble practitioner. If we look up what a practitioner is, we find out that they are a person who practices, and it's usually in a particular field such as law or medicine. Either way, these supplicants are both praying. That is why the subconscious and the conscious are both depicted as masculine in this card. Both are basically begging the higher self that is seen here as more of an authoritarian dictator to the two of them. When the subconscious is transformed, salt becomes the intermediary between the higher self, the element of mercury, and sulfur. Instead of both the subconscious and the conscious appealing directly to the higher self, the consciousness in the Lover's card looks to the subconscious. As I've shared a few times before, our subconscious is the direct phone line to an inner awareness through mundane dreams about everyday life, where we can perfect a task that we are doing, the collective unconsciousness, and divinity through our out-of-body experiences or highly symbolic dreams. This is why one of the directions, the below, of the medicine wheel is the within direction. We must turn within if we truly wish to listen to the still small voice, often attributed to intuition. A very familiar term is women's intuition, and that stereotype exists for a reason. Women are the ones who feel things instead of know things. Therefore, their receptive nature is the dominant trait. I have understood and been working with balancing the two aspects of consciousness, the subconscious feminine and the active masculine, for a very long time. I practice the masculine active intellectual aspect when I analyze the astrology and symbolism of the new moon cycle, and set an intention which is a sort of prayer, but is more like planting a seed in the subconscious. Actively working with and bringing the subconscious into our conscious reality is the proper role of prayer, instead of begging our higher self to provide us with physical comforts and desires. I then practice the receptive reflective nature of the divine feminine energy during the full moon. Here is where I enter meditation upon the symbols and do a crystal healing for those of you here on the channel, because that is a receptive feminine state. The feminine, as a mediator between sulfur, the active aspect of ourselves, often associated with the divine masculine, and Mercury, the reflection of the creator within us, is indicated by what D.W. Huck says. Salt is the imperfect matter of the beginning of the experiment that has to be destroyed and dissolved to release its essences, which are reconstituted into the more perfect form at the end of the experiment. To reach the state of consciousness depicted by the Tarot Key 22, the world, we must first practice the balance of both the divine masculine and divine feminine. Even after we attain that state of consciousness, both aspects continue to be active in equal measure. We are neither completely feminine nor completely masculine. What is really fascinating to me is how Salt and Saturn both seem to have the same attributes. Most know that we start with a leaden consciousness in alchemy and then graduate through the different mental states as states of mind. As D.W. Huck explains, Salt is the key to alchemy, the beginning and end of the great work. In another part of the same book, The Sorcerer's Stone, A Beginner's Guide to Alchemy, he says, on the ladder of the planets, the planet Saturn is the eighth note, the Do, the one not that is both the beginning and end, the alpha and the omega of the transformation. That is why the alchemists consider Saturn and our return to Saturn as the most important part of the great work of alchemy. In other words, D.W. Huck is attributing the same concept, the beginning and end of the great work, as belonging to both Salt and Saturn. This suggests that Saturn and Salt, and therefore lead, are the same. We know that Salt, thanks to Paul Foster Case, represents the subconscious. We will see the return to Saturn when we are working with the system of 12, because near the end of the process we will face the key 15 of the tarot, the Devil card, also known as temptation, as part of that process. In essence, it is not the waking analytical mind that we are working to transform, or the entire consciousness. Instead, it is simply the subconscious that we are trying to redeem and raise up in vibration. The system of 12 is fascinating. We started off with calcination to release the secret fire, referred to in the East as the Kundalini, but in the West as the Anima. This is the true imagination, and the symbol for this is the peacock. Calcination reduces everything to ashes, so only the salt remains. In the system of 12, the congealation is between the salt and its essences. Then the essence is fixed to divinity. In other words, the process we have undergone is that we remove the sword from the stone and realize that the anvil is feminine in nature. Then that feminine aspect is fixed upon divinity. It has, in a way, returned. The subconscious in the tarot cards is always looking up at divinity, when it is in the right order, as Paul Foster Case says. Even more fascinating is that I recently started reading a Rosicrucian Digest by alchemist Frater Albertus, and he defines alchemy as the raising of the vibrations. Based on that, we can see the real purpose of alchemy is to raise the vibration of our subconscious. The reason we know that is because the subconscious is symbolized by salt, Saturn, and lead. These are the symbols for the aspect of ourselves. Alchemy's earthly symbols are truly metaphors for the most basic aspects of ourselves, on one level of the meanings. The reason for this is obvious after reading why so many souls are stuck in samsara. The easiest way to comprehend that is to read books on out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and in-between life experiences. At some point, the soul, the subconscious, stops being fixed on the physical material reality. The soul then turns back to where it came from, the one thing. Alchemy then provides the process of returning home for the soul. In a way, it is the spiritualization of physical material reality. The individual raises their vibration, and as a result, humanity moves a little higher on the scale towards overall enlightenment. It doesn't mean that the nature of this world will change, but that the beings that come here to experience this world will change. These are concepts that I have studied and shared in the fundamental building blocks for the Seeker playlist. I will place a link to that playlist below, and I added it to my main channel's page recently. I'm sharing all of this with you as I study it because it is a part of the process I use to learn about aspects. I have read all of this before, but never dived deeply into the topics to realize the subtle aspects of the process and symbolism. I truly did not realize how important the subconscious was to the entire process. For some reason, I thought it was the raising of the Mars or animal body that we were attempting in alchemy, although I understand now why that is incorrect. That was an assumption that I had when I was going into the process that I never questioned. I will admit when I make a mistake. I will not know the bigger picture of the system of 12 until we complete all 13 moons. However, we have just reached an important juncture. We are 1/4 of the way through the process, and we are finished with the aspects associated with the direction of air on the medicine wheel. These are the early primary stages of the process. We have a lot to go, and I'm really curious what we will encounter at the Capricorn stage, where we reach key 15, because that does puzzle me. The little mysteries and wisdom of alchemy is what prompts me to study it. Not only am I rereading books, but I've started reading Frater Albertus' Rosicrucian book on alchemy, and I have Carl Jung's book on alchemy to read next. I'm not sure that Carl Jung's book will deal with either the 7 or 12 system. I've browsed through it, and it is primarily concerned with just the symbolism instead of the process. There is a lot more to learn and to share. Thank you for joining me in exploring this avenue on the path of the Seeker. Each of you are worth your weight in gold. I truly appreciate every single like and comment that I receive. You are so rare, and I am grateful that you are here. Bye for now.